Hello, my fellow Coyotes. My name's Jacob. I'm the SAAC President. The SAAC is the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. We're an organization on campus that basically allows students to work with the administrations on issues that we see around campus. We have reps from every single team. As you guys know, the school is going to try and reopen in January. And so they sent out that email last week. And, it was a very big email. There was a lot in it. And there was definitely some confusion that I was hearing from my peers and some issues that they were having with it. One of the big issues is that they were mad about the lack of student representation in these plans. And so as the president of the SAAC and knowing that the SAAC's purpose is to represent the student athletes, because that's the majority of us on campus, that I wanted to reach out to Steve to try and talk to the president about just a few of the questions I was already hearing. He set up a meeting that day. This was, I think, Wednesday or Thursday last week, and got to meet with President Thompson that day. We had a really good conversation. Just getting to hear his voice and give more explanation as opposed to just a paragraph on an email was just a lot more genuine to me. So I said, can we try and set up some sort of interview thing so that I can just ask the questions that the students are having? I sent out an email to all of the SAAC reps just saying, what are your issues, what are your concerns, and they should have sent that out to their teams and then compiled them all, sent them in, and they haven't really changed any of the questions whatsoever. I literally just have my document right out in front of me. So President Thompson is here to answer more of the questions about just the process in general, and then Dan's here because some of the questions had to do with testing, because that was kind of a big point that people were getting at. So I'm really thankful that they actually do want to work with us. Some of the concerns is that the school doesn't really care about us, but just from talking with just the administration, with the position that I have, I can tell you that that's really not the case whatsoever. But I mean, with that going, I guess we'll just get started. So President Thompson, this one's for you. This one came from the football team. And it was just, why are we pushing to be on campus so much when there are so many cases nationwide? The situation's changed a lot since August. What is the issue with being online and keeping one another as safe as possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Jacob, our commitment is to have an on-ground, in-person experience. We want students to be able to do what they want to do and to be active on campus, and that has to happen in person. We also know that some students may not feel comfortable being back on campus, and we're perfectly happy to work with them to be a remote learner for the spring semester. We have a number of students who did that in the fall because it was the right decision for them and their family. And then if that's the case for certain students, we'll be happy to do that again. So there's no requirement that you have to be on campus, but for those students who want to be on campus, we're doing all that we can to make sure that we're ensuring it's a safe and healthy environment for students.
Okay. All right, then just kind of backpacking off of that, there were some questions about why we're doing only 7 days. The CDC, unless they may have changed their guidelines, who knows, because it is a constantly evolving situation. Why are we only quarantining for 7 days? I know on the volleyball team, one of them was confused about why we're only doing this why we didn't do this in the first semester, and how she couldn't really find it on the Saline County Department guidelines. So she's just kind of confused where the number's coming from.
Sure. It's a great question. So the world is just different today than it was in August. The Salina community is different today than it was in August. The parameters have changed in a number of ways. She's absolutely right that if you looked at the CDC website or if you looked at the Saline County Health Department, you're going to find 10 days to be a quarantine. But that quarantine is based on people who have come in contact. We are doing this quarantine based on sort of a preventive measure in case somebody has been in contact, they don't know it while they've been at home and are going to come back into our community. We developed this plan in consultation with the Saline County Health Department, so they agreed that 7 days was the right number. I think Dan probably could speak more to it, but as we watch our own data and look at the data the county has, once somebody's exposed, typically they get positive symptoms within 5 to 7 days. It's part of the reason we've gone from 14 days down to 10 is that we're seeing that window really is smaller than we initially thought. And that's the reason we made the decision to go with 7. Again, we worked with the county health department to come up with that decision. They're helping organizations like us make decisions that make sense within our own context that may be different than the decision they may make for USD 305 or they may make for a business in town. But because of who we are and how our community works, and most of our students are residential, they believe this was a good decision for us.
So what about for the students that never left Salina? In that email you talked about when we do come back for this week, you don't want us really interacting with any of the Salina community, pretty much limiting as much as we can. And so, I mean, for me personally, I'm staying here over break. I know I have other peers that are here too that are working jobs, is that really fair for them to have to take that week off because, they're living off campus, they have all these bills to pay?
Sure. So there really aren't a lot of students who have stayed in Salina the whole time. That really is the exception. If that's your situation, I'd encourage you to be in touch with student development and talk through that situation with them. I will tell you that one of our concerns, though, as people who have been working, is that many of the positive tests we saw, especially in the last 2 weeks before school let out, before Thanksgiving, were coming from work-based experiences that students were having in jobs in town. We want students to work. We know this is a financial hardship for some students not to work that week when they're going to be in quarantine. That's part of the reason we gave as much notice as we can, 4.5 weeks, so people could plan. If there's extra shifts they could pick up in advance of that, they could do that. We know everybody won't be able to do that, but our goal here is to accommodate as many people and as much as we can, all the different factors. Because again, you think about 600 students, we have 600 different variations of what's happening in their lives. So we're trying to measure this and do what we can do that's the best for the most people. So if that's your unique situation, or if you have other unique situations, I've heard about students that are coming back after a surgery and they need to do PT, and can they go to their PT? Those are all things we want to talk about with students one-on-one, because it's too hard to make a blanket statement about all those things. The easiest thing is to be kind of clear, here's the plan, and if for some reason there's something that's out the norm that's not going to fit for you, let's talk about that and figure out what the best solution is going to be for you in that situation. So contact student development.
All right, cool. I'm going to flip this over to Dan. One of the things is that I felt a lot of the teams that did have issues were kind of getting it confused between quarantine and isolation. Some of them were really afraid that they're going to be locked in their rooms all week, straight. And so what can we expect to do in our week of quarantine? What are we and are we not going to be able to do as students on campus?
That's a great question. Now let's first start off, what is the difference between quarantine and isolation, as I've seen people get those things confused. So obviously if you're in what we call isolation, we know you've been in direct contact or you've actually are showing the symptoms of COVID. And therefore we need to keep you away from people so we're not spreading the disease anymore. Quarantine, on the other hand, is someone who has maybe been in direct contact but has no symptoms of the actual exposure. We are just doing this to see if potentially you could have the exposure. As we've seen with COVID, there's this thing called an incubational period, or how long it takes to manifest within your body. And it ranges from 2 to 14 days. So that's why initially when we first started doing quarantines, it was 14 days, because they knew in between 2 days to 14 days, you could start showing the signs of COVID. Now through some more data, and then we're able to narrow that window down to 7 to 10 days. But that's the difference. And also during quarantine, you can move around a little bit. You're not confined to one specific area. So in this situation, especially since we've worked with our county health department with this, is we are going to allow you guys to, get with your sports teams and condition in small groups so you're not confined in your room a whole lot. We'll have activities developed, whether our student development program, to help keep you guys kind of entertained throughout the day. I know a lot of sport teams were doing Microsoft team chats or going over those things to keep you guys. You will not be locked in your room 24/7. We'll be doing activities. You'll be outside getting conditioning done so you're not in your room the whole time.
The only really 2 buildings you should be in town during that quarantine is your residence hall building and Shrywise when you go to get your food from the cafeteria. And all of our food will be to go through the 18th of January to make sure that people are just coming and going back to their room, or if they want to eat outside or those pieces. You're also allowed to go to a fast food restaurant and get something to go. You can go to Dillon's or Walmart and do click lists. So you're able to get out and get some things, but we don't want you going into other places because, again, the idea is to keep you away from other people as much as possible, especially if you can't be outside. So if you can be outside with small groups, you can do running, you can do conditioning outside, but not inside. So you won't have access to the Student Activity Center or other buildings on campus during that week.
So, I'd be perfectly good to go for a walk around the block if I want to clear my head. When I lived in the dorms over the summer during all this over in Pfeiffer, I'd be in there for hours at a time. And then at the end of the day, I'd be we've been all up in this room for a long time. And I'd take a walk around the entire campus, and it really helped, freshen up and feel a lot less drained. So like that's okay to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We absolutely encourage the walking around campus, and getting fresh air, clear your mind. I mean, mental health is a big thing nowadays, and we want to make sure that, while we're doing these precautions, that we're also being mindful of the students' mental health, and that we are doing things so that they can clear their head, be engaging with other students, still feel like they're part of a team and working towards this, while still keeping safe and keeping the Kansas Wesleyan University bubble safe.
Since you did bring up mental health, that actually helps me kind of launch off of that into the next question. We talked about the difference between isolation and quarantine just now, but I am just going to read this entire question just for transparency's sake. So what does KWU expect the mental health of the students to be like following quarantine? Do they expect people without roommates to be mentally okay with being alone in their dorms without human interaction? I know we just talked about how it won't be, zero human interaction. It's quarantine, not isolation, but the mental health aspect, it can still be really draining to be, just feeling so separated from everyone for a week. So
I would say that probably is likely to be a larger issue for our early arrivals because they may be here without a roommate. But most of our early arrivals still do have roommates. So they're paired with somebody who's on their sports team or other activity for the reason that brings them back. Again, we're concerned about the mental health. That's part of the reason we'll have a number of activities, including spiritual development aspects, other ways to be in connection with people. And there's also ways, again, to go outside and being able to visit with other people, keeping social distancing while you're doing those pieces. We had success. We feel like in the fall semester, we had a number of students who had to arrive early because they came from a hot zone state and had to quarantine. We provided services for them. And I think generally, while most people don't want to choose to do this, they appreciate that if they had to do it, it went well and they felt supported during that process. And I would say always, though, if you're feeling concerned about your own mental health during this, reach out, be in touch with us, let us know what's going on, let us be a resource, and we won't know unless you're talking to us. We're also going to be proactively in touch, but you've got to be honest and truthful about what's going on if you're struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just weigh in on what Dr. Thompson just said. I mean, we are always going to be here for the students. If any time during this quarantine period, you just, you feel like you're mentally having a struggle with it, please reach out to us. We want to make sure that, that at Kansas Wesleyan, you feel safe and that you feel part of our pack and that we are taking care of you, and that we are helping you get through this time period.
All right. That's actually really good to hear. I'm an RA on campus, and just like so I know about all the resources on campus. I know like how much the school tries to like push to have those available, and even as like the president of the SAAC, like that's kind of like my main mission this like year and semester is to really like push and make sure that like mental health is like a thing that everyone is aware of and like can get help for, because I mean I've had a few issues with it. I'm sure plenty of other people here have as well, and it's just like it's one of those things that you got to keep up on even as like an athlete. Like if you're not there completely mentally, you can't go out there and perform as well. And like for me personally, like I absolutely hate when I can't perform my best in the classroom or on the field because I'm just a little stuck in my head about things that I feel I shouldn't be. So it's good that we have those kinds of resources and that you guys are, really emphasizing like reach out if you need help. Like
Absolutely.
That's like the biggest thing is taking that first step, just starting the conversation, even if you feel like, no one cares or that it might not go anywhere. It's just a really big point is just taking that first step. But you talked about early arrivals. My coaches have touched on this in some of the Zoom calls that we've had about the plans and how it doesn't really affect too many students, but just so people are aware. What about the people who have roommates that are on different sports teams?
Yep.
Like I have a teammate on the track team. We have to be back like December 27th, wherever, the day after Christmas, basically.
Right.
But then her roommate will come back a week later. Will she have to quarantine again, or how is that going to work?
Sure. So there are only 18 students who that's a factor for, so we paid attention to that as we were looking through these details. We are not, so if you're the early arrival and your roommate shows up on on January 10th, you will not have to quarantine again. Your roommate will be in your room doing their quarantine, but you'll be able to come and go during that time. And we believe that will be okay because, again, it's limited interactions.
All right. I'm going to turn back to you and ask you a few questions about testing. I noticed that some of these questions I was getting from some of the teams weren't even so much about the reopening plans, but they just seemed kind of confusion on just like testing procedures in general and just how it all works. So I'm going to hit you up with some of those, Dan. The first one is, why are we not testing every student who has symptoms rather than putting them in quarantine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes down to testing, so obviously when we putting you in quarantine, we feel like you've been in direct contact with someone who's positive. And it goes back to that incubational period. If we were to test you the day after you were in direct contact, the virus may not have had time to develop within your system to where it actually registers a positive on the test, and actually then it registers a negative, which then incorporates a false negative. And therefore, that's what we'd want to try to avoid. So that's why we kind of want to just put you in quarantine and see where things go. And working with the Saline County testing areas, they've actually asked us to, make sure they give them about 2 days before we start asking to get tested. That way it has time to actually get a real good development in their system, so that if they are positive, we get a really strong positive with that. So that way, like I said, we don't want to cause any kind of false sense of security with this. That's why we kind of are putting you in quarantine. Maybe wait about 24 to 40 hours, see where things go off before we start reacting. That's all just because of how the virus works within your system. We don't want to cause that false security, because we want to make sure that people are being smart, wearing their masks, using proper hand hygiene, and we're not creating those false sense of securities with doing testing too early.
All right. This is another just question that I feel needs clarification. So this athlete wonders, why is it when a student gets COVID, we're not aware of who it is in case we're in contact with them to prevent spreading it?
Yeah, that's another great question, and that comes down to more medical privacy. We cannot give everyone information on who tested positive. That just goes back to medical privacy with that. And also, we want to make sure that we're keeping, in some aspects on campus, things calm. You are afraid that sometimes that if you release too much information out there, you can sometimes create a panic that doesn't need to be happening, and therefore potentially could overflow medical facilities and stuff like that due to people thinking they were in direct contact when they're not actually. So that's why we keep things just to the individual. As we do our contact tracing, if we feel like someone was in that contact tracing zone or in that direct contact, then we reach out to that person individually and put them in quarantine. But it all stems to medical privacy.
All right. I do know that, in one of my bigger classes this semester, there are some weeks, especially when sometimes whole teams would get quarantined, and be sitting there and be like, wow, half the class feels like they're in the hotel right now. This is kind of a little worrisome.
Yeah.
But I know this was a question that I got day one, and I'm going to ask you this, President Thompson, is why aren't we doing the quarantines in the hotels anymore for this first week back? So we can try and keep people just completely separated. Why are we choosing to do it in the dorms?
Part of that, again, is knowledge we've learned, logistics of making this all happen. Again, we're trying to accommodate 400 plus students who are residential for us on campus. And in consultation with the Saline County Health Department, they feel like quarantining in your own room will be the best decision for us, because, again, there's no reason to believe most or any of our students coming back will be carrying the virus. There's just a possibility, and that's what this time is about, is just sort of getting us back and clarifying that it's not in people's system. If during the semester you become exposed or you become positive, you will be leaving campus to do your quarantine or isolation, but not necessary for this first one.